Well, welcome everyone to the latest edition of Compelling Conversations. I'm your host, Rabbi Sanford Akselrad at Congregation near Tamid in Henderson, Nevada. Today's guest takes on a bit of an international flavor as we welcome Tali Nates to our program. Tali is the founder and director of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center. She will be our virtual speaker here in Las Vegas on April 24th at our community-wide Yom HaShoah commemoration, in which she will talk about monuments and memory, understanding the Holocaust. An especially important topic always, but especially important as our Jewish community here in Las Vegas sets out to create a Holocaust Memorial Plaza sponsored by the Jewish mortuary King David, and it will be dedicated on that day. Now, looking at her bio, too long to read, so many accomplishments. Tali is the founder and director, as I said, of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, the chair of the South African Holocaust and Genocide Foundation. She's a historian who lectures internationally on Holocaust education, genocide prevention, reconciliation, and human rights. She's presented international conferences, including at the United Nations, and published articles and contributed chapters to many, many books. Born to a family of Holocaust survivors, Tali's father, Moses Turner, and uncle Henrik Turner were saved by Oskar Schindler. Sadly, the rest of the family perished. Well, that's quite a bio, quite a history. So welcome, Tali, to our program.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. It is an honor, actually, to join you today to your program.
Well, I'm honored that you're honored, but we're honored to have you. Even though we've only met virtually, I look forward, maybe God willing, one day I'll make my way and come to your center. So let's begin with, a little bit about you telling more about yourself than simply the bio and why you founded the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center. What was your motivation? We can probably imply, but I want to hear it from your own lips.
Of course. So as you shared, I come from this background, the background of the Holocaust. My father was actually a teenager. He was 14 when the war started, and he survived 4 different concentration camps, but sadly survived only with the one brother. The rest of the family did not survive. And I grew up in Israel. As you can hear from my accent, it's this South African Israeli accent. I grew up in Israel, moved to South Africa many, many, many years ago. And my father was actually a silent survivor. He was very traumatized and he did not speak about his stories. He started to speak to my mother a little bit during the Eichmann trial and a little bit later. But the one that spoke was my uncle. My uncle was the one that was older. He survived 5 concentration camps. Wow. He also was with my father on Schindler's List. So they both survived together. But he was the one that spoke. And I was the one that listened. I was the curious one. I was the little historian, if you wish, in the family. And I would go and want to hear those stories. My father died when I was young. I was a young teenager. He sadly had cancer and he passed away. So I continued to want to know the stories from my uncle. And then maybe, Rabbi, it will not be, far-fetched to say that then I became a historian. I went to university. I studied history. I wanted to hear more than just my family's history. And I became very interested in genocide history, in Holocaust history, started to go to Poland when I was a bit older, take groups, teach in university, work in NGOs. And then Rwanda happened. The genocide in Rwanda happened in 1994. The same month, the same year, South Africa went into our process of democracy. Nelson Mandela became our first president. And I realized that history has a role to play in not only memory of the past, but education of the present and lessons for the future. And that drove me many years after to establish the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center that you can see behind me. That is my background picture. And that is a center that took many years to found with the city of Johannesburg and an NGO that I founded. And we opened it officially. We moved to the building actually in 2016, but opened officially in 2019. And just final line to say that for me, very much, it is a legacy of the memory of my father, Moses Turner, of my uncle that passed away already many years ago, Henrik Turner, but also for the family members that I never met that were murdered during the Holocaust. But it's even beyond the Holocaust. It is for all the survivors that I met through my journey in Rwanda, in Poland, in Germany, in Cambodia, and beyond.
Do you find that most of the people who come to the center are Holocaust survivors or survivors of some form of genocide, or is it high school kids? Who comes to the center?
So South Africa is quite far away from the events of the Holocaust. So not so many survivors came to the country, probably around 350 survivors. That's all. If you compare to Las Vegas, how many came to Las Vegas?
I don't know how many. I don't know how many came to Las Vegas. We have about 80,000 Jews, and we have a very active Holocaust education committee and survivors and second generation. I don't know the number though, but I would imagine it would be in the hundreds, but it could have been more. And sadly, as they age, they're passing away.
Yes, but, we have exactly the same phenomena. We have now, from the 350 or so that came, I think that we have only 25 or 30 still alive with us. And of course, the descendants, exactly like in your situation.
Second generation, third,
yes.
Right.
Yeah, they're very active. So they certainly come to our museum.
So do you find do you have high school kids coming?
So it's a good question. First of all, other communities of survivors come. So you are right to say that, for example, Rwandan survivors come. They're younger, so they come to the center as well. But also very much so high school students, university students as well, teachers, and members of the public. It is a center that is vibrant. It's have a lot of visitors that are coming to the center, and they want to learn. They want to also have dialogues. They want to hear survivors. They want to hear the testimonies of survivors, and that's what we do. So we do a lot of programs during the day and also special programs in the evening. Yes.
As I reflect back upon my own career, my rabbinic thesis, which I completed in 1984, a couple of years ago, was on Holocaust education. What I did is I applied Lawrence Kohlberg's theory of moral development to the teaching of the Holocaust, and I looked at how the Holocaust was being taught in public schools and in religious schools throughout the United States. The reason I applied Lawrence Kohlberg's theory of moral development was everybody always says, never again, and we learn the lessons of the Holocaust to prevent it. Well, I don't know. That's a high bar. We see a lot of tragedy, which leads me to the tension that I found. I found in Jewish religious schools, there was a desire to portray the Holocaust as something sui generis, something unique that could not even be compared to any other genocide. But in the public schools, perhaps for political or educational purposes, the Holocaust was always being compared to other genocides. It could be Native Americans, could be Cambodia, could be all kinds of mass killings where they would find an equivalency. Little did I know that was, quote, a thing among historians and especially among my colleagues when I began to create Holocaust observances. My first one was in Columbus, Ohio, where I lived. And then I brought it here to Las Vegas for community-wide observance. And there are some folks who say this is only for the survivors. There is no place for comparisons. And then there are others who say, but if we keep it only to ourselves, then how are we teaching the lessons of the Holocaust for everybody? I don't know if you want to weigh in on that at all. And
so it's interesting because you did your thesis in 1984, Rabbi, and I think these were the years, the 1980s, that the Holocaust started to become, may we say, an educational tool. It's only really the early years, because don't forget that
I was ahead of my time.
Yeah, 100. No, but 100%.
I didn't feel that way.
No, but 100%, because I think for many of the survivors after the Holocaust, they wanted to build their families. Many of them, it was very traumatizing. I told you about my own father. It was very difficult to speak about it. And at the same time, rebuild your family, have children, get a profession, rebuild your economic life, and so on. And many of the survivors only started to speak about what happened to them to their grandchildren, not even to their children. And if I look at, as I said to you, I grew up in Israel. In Israel, really, the Holocaust became a study, in high schools, only in the 1980s and 1990s. If you look at Germany, in Germany, the Holocaust Memorial in Berlin only opened in 2005, Rabbi. So you are talking about generations of coming to terms with that history. It wasn't quick, it was a process. And indeed, in that time, you had other genocides that happened. So Cambodia in 1975, Rwanda in 1994, Srebrenica in 1995, and so on and so forth. And of course, Auschwitz was never built again, and please God, it will never be built again. But other aspects of men, mainly men, some women, but mainly men, mass murdering, targeted groups just because they were what they were, if they were Tutsi or Khmer or Bosniaks, Bosnian Muslims. And in a way, what historians are doing is trying to make sense, ethically as well as historically, of that targeting of people. Why is it happening? Can we recognize steps, warning steps perhaps? And I'll give you an example. Perhaps you heard about Professor Gregory Stanton, who is actually a professor of law. And what he tried to do is to say, let's try to see if there are stages of genocide. Maybe if we know these different stages of genocide, we will know how to prevent the next one. I don't think that we are there yet, by the way. But what he's trying to say is, can we recognize dehumanization? Or can we recognize when laws are being passed and, the us and them and so on? And by doing that, not minimizing the Holocaust in any way, but saying to ourselves, can we somehow understand the different stages that took place? And then when we see these stages, we maybe can involve international community or the law and prevent it from escalating.
Seems like a parallel track to what I tried to do, because I wanted to apply moral development. In other words, I wanted to see if there was a way of teaching the Holocaust as a tool to prevent another man's inhumanity to man by applying Lawrence Kohlberg's theory of moral development.
Yes.
I think what the law professor and what I were trying to do, they're parallel tracks, because if we don't learn from history, as they say, you're doomed to repeat it. But my question, I guess, was even a little bit more pointed, because we see the use of the Holocaust used time and time again in the political arena. You want to call someone a Nazi. You want to say that even in what's going on in Ukraine, we have Zelensky saying, never again is not true unless we intervene in Ukraine. He goes to the Israeli Knesset and he makes his plea. And on the world stage, his message is very well heard. But in Israel, because he kind of made that statement, that's what they focused on. And they all said, no, no, no. What's happening to you is terrible, but don't compare it to the Holocaust. Just because there's a war, it's not the same as the Holocaust. And so I find that the Jewish community is very protective of sticking to that strict definition of what the Holocaust is. We even had recently, I think it was Whoopi Goldberg, who talked about the Holocaust only being man's inhumanity to man and nothing about racism. And boy, was there blowback, because of course the Shoah had a strong racial component because the Nazis viewed the Jews as a race, and she had to backtrack and apologize. But it seems to be very sensitive in the Jewish community that we need to protect that memory, but it has to be balanced by learning lessons that I think are universal and applicable to so many other people and genocides. Otherwise, what does it mean to say never again? It's not just about our people, it's about any people.
Yeah.
And I think your center, if I'm not mistaken, focuses on that. And I think that's so important in terms of Holocaust education.
Yeah, yeah. You see, Rabbi, there's so much in what you're saying, because I spoke about my father's trauma, that is an individual trauma. But of course, the Jewish people, in a way, have a collective trauma. It's a foundational trauma of a loss of so many people, and that wound is there, and it's very, very deep. So when a synagogue is attacked, I'm thinking about the Tree of Life in Pittsburgh, right, or Halle in Germany, when you have an attack, it throws us back as a community to Kristallnacht, to the burning of synagogues. It's so deep. The trauma is so deep.
It's almost,
what we're trying, yeah.
It's almost like our own PTSD, if you will.
Yes,
right?
Yeah, 100%. And I would actually say that we have a PTSD. We have a communal trauma or collective trauma that is triggered by things that remind us of where we were or where we were hurt, or the fear trigger of it's happening again, or so on. But of course, what you're saying, and maybe I'll bring it to the center. And what we're trying to say is, we can and we should also learn about human behavior. We should learn about humans' choices beyond only the choices of the Holocaust, and perhaps that will equip us ethically as human beings to become perhaps more of upstanders or active citizenship, active citizens, that we learn from our memory, our painful, traumatic memory about acting now in the betterment of humanity. These are the connections that we are trying to do in our center, that it's going beyond the memory. It's going from memory to education, to dialogue, to lessons for humanity, and perhaps to activism to make our world a better world today.
Which leads me to the importance of monuments. Do you think it's important to have Holocaust monuments spread throughout the world? I mean, we have a smaller one at Temple Beth Shalom, based upon these bricks that they got from the Warsaw Ghetto. So this is really the first monument that we're having for Nevada that has a broader implication for all those who perished in the Holocaust. But so many states around the United States and countries do have Holocaust monuments.
Yes.
Do you think they'll just be like, other monuments where people walk by them and they go, I don't know, who was that person during the Civil War, and who was that person during the Civil Rights Movement? Or do you think that that there's a need not just to have a monument, but combine it with, an education component, which is what I feel is so important.
Yeah, I'm very curious, and maybe you know to tell me a bit more about this new memorial. But let me try and answer your question first. I spoke about collective trauma and communal trauma and PTSD of the community, but the Holocaust was beyond, of course, a Jewish trauma. It was a world war that the Holocaust was within. And in history, in world history, you have certain historical events, I believe, that are defining the human race. It's beyond just the Jews. So if you think about the French Revolution. The French Revolution is not about the French alone, it's not about the French alone remembering the events of the French Revolution. There were ethical and moral ways of thinking that influenced the whole world. And we all learn in all our schools about the French Revolution, and we are certainly not French. The Holocaust is one such historical event, in my view. And the reason that you have so many memorials and museums is the understanding and the realization that the moral and ethical lessons from this specific history goes beyond the Jews, that everyone was involved in one way or another through rescue or through perpetration or being bystanders or being resistance fighters or being victims. Everyone was involved, and there are choices and dilemmas that everyone can reflect on and learn and make connection to yourself. So the Holocaust is a historical event, but you make connections to your own morality, to your own choices, to your own life today. And that is the strength of the Holocaust. But then memorials and museums need to reflect on that. And you can only reflect on that through education, and through education about identity and about us and them, and education about choices, and education about life, not only about death, about the sanctity of life and the importance of life. So these are some of the things that a good memorial, a good museum will make you reflect on. And I'm curious, maybe tell me a little bit about this new memorial.
I think it's going to be a work in progress as we talk about it. We have the monument part. So people will come to this plaza. They will see the names of different concentration camps, and there will be a chronology of the Holocaust and the highlights. So that's where we started.
Yes.
And the idea was that maybe there would be a guide there, and the guide would talk to the school children or the visitors. And then recently we came up with something a little bit more creative, because we don't know how many groups are going to come by, and people may come at their own leisure. So believe it or not, we're thinking about creating QR codes so that as people come, they'll take their phones on the QR code, and it will unveil either a local survivor talking about their experience, or it will take them to a page that will give more in-depth knowledge about a particular concentration camp. So I think our monument will become more interactive as the years go by and as our technology improves. So it won't simply be just a place where people come on Yom HaShoah and pay their respects, or on the anniversary of someone who lost a loved one. We want it to be more. We want it to be a place of education, and it's gonna take us a while to make that happen.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're running out of time. So first of all, before I get to our last question, I want to, so many people who are watching this are probably going to be inspired. How do they contribute to the center if that's what they would like to do? What's the simplest way? I'm assuming you have a website.
Yes, absolutely. And we will be so grateful. We don't charge entry. And as you know, South Africa is a society where many would like to come, but they're struggling to come. So we help schools from disadvantaged communities to come to the center and to learn. And we would love to partner with your congregation and with people listening to this conversation. And please do go to our website. As you can see, it is in the bottom of your screen, www.jhbholocaust.co.za. And please just go to the donate page and whatever you can, just give and know that the child in South Africa will be able to study about the Holocaust and hopefully will learn lessons from it.
We never know where our next leader might come from.
Which
leads me to the last question. Really, I want to end on a note of hopefulness. You know, being Jewish professionals, in our inbox, we always get all these things about the rise of anti-Semitism. It's gone up 10%, 100%, 50. Oh my God. How do we live in a world where there is rising anti-Semitism, but yet live in a world of hope as well? We have to balance that out. And I have my own thoughts, but please go ahead, Tali.
So as you know me, we met twice, and I'm sure that you already noticed that I'm the true optimist. And somehow I learned that even though when you learn about really dark chapters in our history and in the history of humanity, you should concentrate on the good. You should concentrate on the hope. And you should concentrate on those that can make a difference, those that can make a huge change in someone else's life. And I will call on everyone that is listening to us, Rabbi, today, to concentrate on the ways that they can make a difference. They can contribute to positive change. And if it is through education, through doing one act of goodness a day, smiling to a stranger, being kind to someone else, contributing to a cause that they believe that will benefit the world or their community or their society, I think together we can make a change for the good. And that is my way of living, and that is my way of believing that we can change the world. Maybe slowly, maybe it will take time, but we can do so.
Beautiful. It's beautiful. I think of Anne Frank, who said, "I still believe, that the world is still good. People are still good at heart." Yeah. I guess I look at it a little bit more from a political angle, because I was a poli-sci major, and when people start looking at the rise of anti-Semitism and how bad things are, I remind them that we're not in 1939, and we're not even, I don't think, in 1933. The world has changed in so many ways. Even in the ways it hasn't changed, we still have man's inhumanity to man. But in terms of the Jewish community and the threat to Jews in particular, during the Holocaust, we didn't have people who could speak up for us and speak truth to power in the way that we do today. We didn't have a modern state of Israel. We didn't have organizations such as the Anti-Defamation League and so many other organizations that would call people out who are embracing anti-Semitic ideas. And so I think that although the anti-Semitism has been persistent for thousands of years, we now have a voice to say, this will not happen again. We will push back, we will call it out, we will ensure that the integrity of the Jewish people remains one in which we will fight for our rights, fight for our freedom, and our ability to remain a vibrant religion throughout the world. And who would have thought, for example, in Ukraine, where so much devastation is going on, that they would be led by a Jewish president?
Absolutely.
In a land where so much sadness happened during the Holocaust for the Jewish people, and now there's a Jewish voice. Yeah. Perhaps people will understand that the message of our religion and our faith is not one of intolerance, is not one of apartheid, is not one in which we want to hate other people, but rather we teach a message of hope, of justice and of man's humanity to man. That's my hope. And I hope that as people understand Judaism and our mission as a light unto the nations, that our religion will get the respect that it's due, and that we will indeed, please God, live in a world closer to that messianic idea when peace becomes a universal theme throughout the world. Well, my prayer, your prayer, who knows? If God is listening, please God, listen. In the meantime, we thank our listeners and our viewers for watching. Tali, thank you so much for giving us of your time. We look forward to your presentation on Yom HaShoah, our community observance at King David Memorial. It'll start at 3:30 with our observance and conclude with the dedication of our monument that day, and it's open to the entire community. All are welcome. There's no charge, and we look forward to that. Tali, thank you so much. We appreciate your time, your insights, and your wisdom. Keep up the good fight. We are very proud to be a part of that experience today.
Thank you.